Well, good morning and welcome to our centenary festival of holism and evolution. Just out of interest to help us all know where we all are, would you like to raise a hand if you were up early, or two hands if you were up very early? Okay, lots of good energy. Thank you. My name is Michael Stock, as many of you will know, and Claudius asked me to say a few words at the beginning and at the end of each day. It would help us if you would kindly put where you are in the chat, and if you would like to share in a word or two um, any thoughts about today, and to enjoy a deep breath. You might like to know I'm in Bristol, in the west of England, and I was up very early this morning, which was fantastic because I got to see a family of young fox cubs that I hadn't seen before, playing about. And on the Bristol theme, I have a neighbour down the road called Malcolm Dawn, who was a filmmaker with David Attenborough. And he recently made an absolutely wonderful BBC documentary called A Garden of a Thousand Bees, in which, and you might like this, he patiently observes their lives, observing that bees are obsessed about holes. Well, today we have a larger space with more time and more great speakers and a tea break after about an hour and a half. We will listen to Dr. Jude Currivan with a unitive vision for humanity. Then David Lorimer after the break with inwardness and agency in the evolution of consciousness. And then lastly, Claudius will be in a dialogue with all the presenters. But first, a quick recap from Marcus Link's extraordinary presentation yesterday. Keystones in the pattern of place, described by Benita as eco-poetic, which is a beautiful way, I think, of describing what I experienced as a waterfall of images, poetry, philosophy, history, nature, with a touch of technology, exploring the relationship of our personal footprints and ecological patterns with, sadly, lost connections with a more holistic and older way of knowing and being. For those of you who are on the call, you might have noticed and liked that Klaus and Marcus took slightly different views from just history about whether the well-known examples of overshoot, exploitation, and degradation, like Easter Island, are just typical or inevitable. More on that later. There were two of Marcus's ideas which deeply resonated with me, and if I may, I'd like to share them very quickly. The first one was from William Blake's concept of the imagination, not as escape, but as a way to encounter nature, which tied in with what Jeff Bloomberg had told us earlier about Jan Smuts' spiritual views and nature's way. And the other thing that resonates still this morning was Marcus's question for us. What kind of storyteller am I with the footprints of my life? I wonder what question you are holding this morning. So, as we often like to do, let's take a few deep breaths to enjoy the start of the fourth day in this wonderful festival of holism and evolution. A few deep breaths before Claudius. Two more. Claudius, please.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that wonderful recap. It brought back lots of rich feelings for me. And deeply honored to welcome and introduce Dr. Jude Currivan. About 10 years ago, there was a conference around holistic farming in London at the Rural Steiner Center. And it was organized by Christopher Cook. And the guest of honor at that stage was Alan Savory with his holistic management process, which inspired all sorts of people, including Marcus. But we made a connection there with Jude, Dr. Jude Currivan. And it's been such a privilege that Jude has addressed us before and that she's going to be addressing us now. And we've had the opportunity of visiting Jude at her lovely home. So Jude is a cosmologist. And what is beautiful about that is chapter 12 of Holism and Evolution was cosmic holism, universal holism. Jude is going to give us the context of that, how it relates to us personally. She's a planetary healer. She's a futurist. So our liminal space that is phase 2 is going to be imagining the future. And she's an award-winning author and filmmaker. She's Evolutionary Leaders Circle Council member, associated member of the Club of Rome, and previously a senior UK-based international businesswoman. She is a lifelong researcher into the universe nature of reality and a co-founder of the Whole World View. So we will be offering Jude's paper to the Club of Rome, and you can just find that. Michelle will be putting that in the chat box, and also the link to Jude's network, which we encourage you to follow. So Jude's work aims to empower collective and planetary healing and the conscious evolution and transformational change in the world. Jude, it is an honor to have you with us. Over to you.
Thank you, Claudius. Well, it's my delight always. And what a wonderful opportunity for us to gather to honour Jan Smuts, who was such a pioneer of this understanding. And I really want to dwell on that a little bit. And I have some slides to share, and then we can open to questions. But back in 1926, the prevalent worldview was really that of late 19th century science. Of a mechanistic universe, a universe of separation. And even though by 1926, the quantum physicists, Einstein, were already giving us some profound clues that that paradigm was no longer valid, it needed to be both included and transcended. Nonetheless, the worldview that drove the Industrial Revolution and all our structures were based on that mechanistic perspective. And they still do. 100 years on from, Jan's wisdom, we still have a world that is run on the idea that our universe is a mechanism. And that wouldn't have been so challenging if it had just been a scientific perspective. But because its technologies were so powerful and drove the Industrial Revolution, they drove our economic and financial system. They pervaded the way in which we educate our young people, not to educare, not to bring forth what is divinely within them, but to enable them to become cogs in that machine. It pervades our so-called healthcare system, which is actually not a healthcare system, rather more than a disease system, insofar that it seeks to keep people physically well enough to be able to be those cogs in those machines. So, Jan's prescience in writing Holism and Evolution was phenomenal, given those surroundings. And what I'd like to share today is how 100 years further on, the evidence that supports his insights and wisdom are now so compelling that, as Claudius mentioned recently, the Club of Rome have invited me to write a paper called The Unitive Science of a Living Universe. And as Michelle will kindly put that in the chat for us, but not only the Club of Rome, but it's been adopted by the World Academy of Arts and Sciences as well. And that organization was founded by Oppenheimer and Einstein and included people like Picasso and many others. And thirdly, it's also been adopted and is on the UNESCO Bridging website. So this is now getting some major movement forward, this unitive vision for humanity that I'll share today. But, you know, as Newton said, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. And I feel so honoured and grateful to stand on those shoulders of giants that include Jan Smuts. So I'm delighted to honour and respect and applaud all that he's done for us and still is doing for us. So I just wanted to mention that. I also wanted to say that, you know, when he had his insights of patterns and holons and an evolutionary universe, they were absolutely fundamentally correct. And so some of the evidence I'll share today supports that. But go to the paper or the books that I've written for vastly more evidence, because today I really want to ask a question or invite a question. If we see the world through the lens of wholeness, what changes does that make in our choices and behaviors? Because we've been seeing the world really collectively through a lens of separation. And as a result, I would suggest we have what I call a dis-ease of separation. Now that can be turned on its head with all the evidence. And it invites us, as the paper itself does, to then ask new questions from this position of wholeness and interdependence, far more even than an interconnectedness, a fundamental interdependence within a wholeness. And that's what he saw. He saw 100 years ago. And I'm so delighted that today I can, as we all are, can bring forward. He doesn't need validation. He was right. But anything I can do to help humanity see that rightness and be invited into this adventure of what does this unitive vision and perspective mean for us? Perhaps, yes, to still be able to choose and step into our emergent future as a keynote species on our planetary home. This, for me, is the opportunity and the invitation that the universe is now offering us. So on that note, I will aim to share my screen and let's see if we can, here we go. Okay, can everyone see this?
There we are, all in order.
I wouldn't say that, Claudius. I had to do theoretical physics for my master's at Oxford University, and I specialise in cosmology and quantum physics, because I'd walk into an experiment and it would blow up or break down or blow a fuse. So the professor said, Jude, please, please, please just go away and study theoretical physics. We can't afford you in the laboratory. So this is what I'll be sharing today. And this begins, and this is an image taken from the Club of Rome paper, because it shows what the evidence is now revealing are the fundamental attributes of an insight and crucially the evidence at all scales of existence and across many different fields of research. These are the key attributes of our universe that, when they come together, offer a cosmic perspective, a unitive vision that correlates, aligns with, underpins, frames, takes forward Jan Smuts' perspectives, not just in the physics of the world, but the metaphysics, the underlying deeper fundamental nature of reality, that these attributes enable a universe to manifest in its wonder. So we start on, I'm going to start going round in circle. I'm going to start with the attribute that our universe, the evidence now is strongly suggesting that it is finite in space and time. It began around 13.8 billion years ago in a minute in a minute state. And ever since then, as space has expanded and time's flowed forward, it's undertaken an evolutionary journey. And the evidence we have is that that journey is likely to come to an end. And the latest, only a few weeks ago, study suggested, and I've written about this previously, perhaps tens of billions of years ahead. So we don't need to make plans, for that length of time. We're okay. But it's not likely to be trillions, and it isn't infinite. And yet we are, as Sir James Jeans once said, perhaps considering our universe as a great thought, and now a great finite thought in the infinite and eternal mind of God, or cosmic mind, as Einstein would say. So we're positioning our journey, our evolutionary journey now, in the context of a finite journey for our universe, and yet set within an infinite and eternal plenum of God, or whatever term we want. We could say great mystery, great spirit, but whatever term we have, that reality is ultimately infinite and eternal. But today I'm going to share more about the evidence for the story of our universe. And so not only we're seeing it as finite, we're also now the evidence is showing it's innately relational. And this converges with universal wisdom teachings and indigenous teachings, that it is innately relational. It is not made up of separate objects. It is related, and those relational relations enable it to be exquisitely fine-tuned, extraordinarily ordered, and innately meaningful and purposeful, with those relationships being revealed in the holons, the fractal patterns, as we now refer to them, that pervade space-time and are showing up at all scales of existence. For example, we see them when clusters of atoms phase transition from atoms being a metal to being an insulator. The electrons cluster in these patterns, these holonic patterns. We see them scaling up to planetary levels of ranges of mountains, of clouds, of weather patterns. We see them at the scale of our solar system, where the solar wind, the wind of particles that emanate from our sun all the time, are fractal. We see them in galactic structures. We see them in vast clusters of galaxies. And we see them in the relic radiation left over from a very early epoch of our universe, about 380,000 years into the story of our universe. Space expanded enough to cool down enough to become transparent to light. And in that relic radiation, we see the holonic fractal patterns, which is so beautiful. So what Jan saw, we now have the evidence at all of these incredible scales, and they scale up and scale down, and they nest in each other. So their complexity is nested from atoms and molecules and stars and galaxies to planets and plants and people. And we see them not just in what we might term natural systems, such as ecosystems. We see them, the same patterns underpin and pervade human-made systems, such as the internet. We see the same nodes, the same relationality, the same multi-level holonic, holarchic relationships in the internet as we do in the in ecosystems. We see in the so-called or so-named power laws that describe the relationship between the frequency of a phenomenon and its destructive or creative power. The power laws, we see them in the way that cities grow in terms of population density of people, and galaxies grow in the population densities of stars. We see them in when we analyse earthquakes. We analyse thousands of earthquakes, and we see there's no such thing as an average earthquake. What we see when we graph earthquakes from the smallest to the largest, and then graph those against their frequency, we see a straight line, showing that the only relationship is the frequency of an earthquake and its destructive power. The bigger the earthquake, the less often it happens. That's the relationship. But it scales across hundreds of thousands of such levels of scale, from tiny tremors to vast earthquakes, such as that in Japan. 15 years ago or thereabouts. And crucially, when we analyse human conflicts, we see the same relationships. After the Second World War, an analysis was made of hundreds of human conflicts, including two world wars, but also many smaller regional conflicts, and also analysis by researchers at the University of Miami in Florida did so in terms of insurgencies in Afghanistan and Iraq. And they found the same relationships between the frequency and the destructive power of human conflicts, in this case, the number of deaths. And when they mapped them, it was exactly the same graphical representation as for earthquakes. We cannot separate ourselves from our universe in any way at all. We are literally inseparable, and yet we are each unique. We are differentiated in vast diversity and complexity, as is the whole universe, and yet we are inseparable from its wholeness. This is the way that this is able to be manifested is holographically, expanding and extending the study of the thermodynamics of black holes and the question, what happens to the information that is held within an evolving star when at the end of its life, a massive star, it uses its nuclear fuel, it collapses, but it's so massive that the collapse gravitationally cannot be stopped. And it collapses inside what's called an event horizon where not even light can escape. What happens? Because if the information is lost, then we can throw quantum theory out the window, literally. The maths, the physics just don't work if that information is lost to our universe. And so what we've come to realize is that it is retained, mixed up, but still there, still retained. But instead of being proportional to the spherical volume of the black hole, it is proportional to the two-dimensional surface area of its event horizon. Now that went off like a light bulb thought for physicists and cosmologists, because that's exactly how a hologram works. A hologram works by throwing a beam of light at a three-dimensional object, reflecting back off that object with all the information of that object, being able to then show that information on a two-dimensional surface, and then put another beam of light through that two-dimensional pattern of information and project a three-dimensional hologram of that original object. So what we've been able to do since this was understood about 15, 20 years ago was to continue to develop an understanding that our entire universe exists and evolves as a cosmic hologram. And doing so, the both and that within space-time, nothing goes faster than the speed of light. And yet, the wholeness, the unitive wholeness of our universe means that on its holographic surface of space and time, all the information that's been accrued from its very beginning, every moment from that first moment 13.8 billion years ago to now, has continued to accrue, and so to tell the evolutionary story of our universe. And what this means is that a phenomenon of quantum physics called non-locality, which was showing that for quantum physics to work at all, our universe must be unitive. It took a very long time for experiments to be able to prove that. But in 2018, an experiment by a coalition of researchers led by some at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, were able to non-locally entangle photons of light in a laboratory with starlight from 600 light years away. And the whole of the quantum, what's called the quantum avalanche or quantum cascade, non-local cascade, was triggered by photons of light from an incredibly energetic galactic center 12.2 billion light years away. The light left, those photons left that what's called a quasar 12.2 billion years ago. They were collected, down a telescope, and they triggered this non-local entanglement of laboratory photons and starlight. And that showed that the whole universe at cosmological scales is non-locally unitive within a holographic perspective. Now, this was so important that in 2022, the Nobel Prize for Physics was given to 3 seminal researchers in this field. And the Nobel Prize is only given for settled science. No cosmologist would argue against this now, that our universe is a unitive entity. We are literally inseparable from its wholeness, and yet its evolutionary journey has been from simplicity to ever greater complexity and diversity and individuated self-awareness. This is settled science. We can argue the details, but not the wholeness of this insight and understanding. And we now understand too that its information, its reality, its holographically manifested nature is pixelated at what's known as the Planck scale. Now, our holograms, our communications technologies, all are pixelated with ones and zeros that come together to form meaning and intelligent communication. The pixelation scale of our universe at the Planck scale is 1 trillion times smaller than our best high definition comms technologies. It's as small as to an atom is to the entire universe as it now is. It's extraordinarily small, both in space and in time. And the point of the importance of the Planck scale, it doesn't matter what measurement or what measure we term it in, whether it's meters and seconds or inches or miles or jelly babies or whatever it may be. So because this falls out of the laws of physics. In other words, 1 Planck distance is the distance that a light beam travels in 1 Planck scale. Scientifically, this means it normalizes to 1. It doesn't matter what measurement we use. And so any species able to understand the universe in this way would almost certainly understand its pixelation at the Planck scale. Because if it understood the laws of physics and the principles of relationality and all these attributes, then there would be the realization, almost certainly, that it does so at the Planck scale. And crucially, and this is both the cherry on top, but also perhaps the underpinning, is that meaningful information, not random data, but in-hyphen formation, as I term it, is a fundamental, not just a fundamental feature, but the underpinning and framing of all of this cosmological modelling coming together that is itself founded on compelling evidence, as I say, numerous evidence at all scales and many different fields of research. But because information underpins and frames all of the appearance of our universe, this is a realization that the energy, matter and space-time of our universe are not its most fundamental nature, that they arise and are holographically manifested, but they arise from deeper realms of non-physical causation. And so the unitive science of a living universe expresses that our universe is indeed a great thought, a sentient, unitive entity that emerges from deeper realms of cosmic causation and intelligence. Cosmic mind, as Einstein called it, God, as we might call it, great mystery, as indigenous traditions may call it. But this is now what we can stand on, that unity isn't an aspiration. It is our existential reality. This just really summarizes the same patterns shape everything, as I've mentioned, and they don't just pervade so-called natural systems, they pervade everything that we come to co-create together. That universal reality is built on relationships and interdependence with innate meaning and inherent evolutionary purpose. And our entire universe is inherently fundamentally unitive. This is what we can be invited to consider as a wider perspective of who we really are and who we can evolve to become. And this, as I mentioned, is the new discussion paper. And what I feel is so important is how science now is converging with perennial wisdom teachings, spiritually based traditions, indigenous knowledge, to converge in a deeper understanding of a living universe. And what does that mean when we not only see the world through this unitive perspective, but what do we do about it? So our entire universe exists and evolves. Crucially, we are its microcosmic co-creators in this understanding, this perspective. And we and our planetary home, Gaia, our solar system, our entire universe, embody meaning and purpose. I would suggest that embracing our wholeness, awakening our hearts, calls us to become self-aware, conscious and co-evolutionary partners with its ongoing evolutionary potential. That's really this response to, could we be a keynote species going forward? Can we evolve? Can we grow up? Can we remember who we really are? This is the question. And this is a beautiful quote from Jan Smuts that speaks, it seems to me, to this. The intimate rapport with nature is one of the most precious things. Nature is indeed very close to us, sometimes closer than hands and feet, of which in truth she is but the extension. The emotional appeal of nature is tremendous, sometimes almost more than one can bear. And he saw this. And back in 1926, he was not able, other than in his inner vision, to perceive and the vast clusters of galaxies, because the technologies that the old scientific mechanization and materiality have brought forward are marvelous. And wonderfully, they are revealing the divine nature of reality. The materiality is revealing the deeper fundamental nature of reality, the divinity of reality. And so really I would suggest that what this is inviting us into is what the ancients would have called sacred science, the realization of the innate sacredness of the whole of reality. Another quote, instead of the animistic, mechanistic, or indeed the mathematical universe, we see the genetic, organic, holistic universe. And I speak to physics is mathematics made real, because mathematics is a language, yes, but mathematics can take us anywhere, and including round in circles and in gobbledygook. But mathematics embraced and embodied in the relational nature of our universe as reality, and it's deeper, and its emergence from deeper realms of causation is a very beautiful expression of that language. And evolution, he said, is the gradual development and stratification, a progressive series of wholes, which I've just shared in very brief summary. But the unitive science of a living universe sets it out, and the whole evolutionary journey in much greater detail, with the evidence of this series of wholes, this holarchic, holonic nesting of wholes, stretching from the inorganic beginnings and simplicity to the highest level of spiritual individuation through its entirety and within us as microcosmic co-creators. And what this does for me also is it invites us to take love seriously. It's a wonderful sentiment, but the universal relationality of a living universe, it seems to me, invites us to take love as a universal principle of coherence and healing and wholeness. So one of the projects I'm working on at the moment with many wonderful colleagues is a science of unitive love, to really bring together this cosmological perspective, but at all scales, of unitive science, and then us within it embracing unitive love and our relationship, our healed relationship, our wholeness with its wonder and beauty. So this is what soul is. It's emergent, it's evidence-based, it very much converges the unitive science with indigenous perennial wisdom as a natural love, as a natural attribute of the unitive nature of reality. So here is what the work is. It's emergent. We'd love to keep close to what you're all doing, because we hope that this really helps to inspire and empower the experiential and the embodiment of this unitive vision for humanity as founded on love and pervaded by love. It seems to me that what this again invites us to do is to reframe what's sometimes called the polycrisis. And the polycrisis is named really when I think there is a material mechanistic worldview. If we take a step deeper, it's a metacrisis, it seems to me, of our metaphysical worldview. And when we reframe evidence-based into this unitive perspective, that of course Jan was such a key voice within, we can reframe a metacrisis to a metamorphosis as a way of us as perhaps being considered a caterpillar species. I love caterpillars, even when they eat all my cabbages. I love them. But a time comes when a caterpillar goes into a chrysalis and that part of its life cycle breaks down and it becomes a nutrient soup and keeps its, actually we know now, it keeps a memory, but it actually breaks down and breaks through into the imaginal cells and organelles of a butterfly. And a butterfly sees the world through completely different eyes than a caterpillar does. A caterpillar has what's called simple eyes, enough to find food, enough to know up and down. But a butterfly sees through complex eyes of nuances of colour and richness and diversity, and therefore is able to be a pollinator rather than a consumer. So again, this seems to me an invitation through this vision to make choices and to step into an empowered sense that yes, we are in a turbulence, a birthing canal potentially, but of a metamorphosis into an utterly new and wondrous adventure as human beings. And this seems to me can empower transformational change, because this, when the quantum physics discoveries were there and relativity, people got very excited, but in generally, most folks didn't really see them as being relevant to their lived lives. This now is far more than a scientific revolution, because this unitive understanding, for me, is an opportunity to frame a societal and cultural invitation for us to consciously usher in our next and evolutionary steps as a species. It can empower and inspire us to remember, not just remember intellectually, but we've dismembered, it seems to me, our psyche, our collective psyche, through this mechanistic perspective. And I'm not blaming and shaming. I hope we can perhaps go into this in more depth in some of the questions. I'm not blaming or shaming that journey. It's brought us to where we are now. But where we are now shows its continuance is unsustainable. And at the same time, we are able to wake up and remember who we really are. And so and envision together and co-create together who we can evolve to become. Reframe what is happening as a metamorphosis. And so to transform from the inside out, the inner being to the outer doing, the being and the doing of seeing and behaving and choosing in the world through new eyes. Very briefly, the paper invites this perspective to the Club of Rome paper. What this could mean, I suggest, to help heal the traumas of our collective disease of separation. And instead of conflict and war, apply this understanding to reconciliation and peace building and justice, to transform our education into learning ecosystems, including planetary regeneration. Apply not to hierarchical governance coming from that old mechanistic worldview, but to multilateral, pluralistic, governance and leadership, and how to be a good ancestor for future generations in these times. We mentioned earlier very briefly, how can we bring this unitive science with its empathy and compassion and ethics, its ethics, to AI and technological innovation? Because the old science, often purported to be values free or values light, in an interdependent understanding of our universe, science cannot separate itself from that relationality while still being objective. It cannot just take a place apart from. It cannot be apart from, because none of us are apart from. We are all a part of. And I think, very importantly, transform economics into an evolutionary perspective and potential. I'm working with some leading edge economists, including John Fullerton, who's just written a book called Regenerative Economics, coming from this unitive perspective and how it can transform economics and our financial system. And I was with Ian McGilchrist recently and David Lorimer in Oxford, how this can show how the philosophical, intuitive understanding of universal beauty and truth and goodness, how this can show how we can embed it in our lives, framed by standing on this unitive perspective, and to come and realize ourselves as Gaians, as regenerative stewards and co-evolutionary planetary partners. And with Jana Gan Smuts, we need not approve. Sorry, the world is good. The world is good. And I can't see the top part of this. The world itself is good. We need not approve of all the items in it, nor of all the individuals in it, but the world itself, which is more than its parts or individual, which is ultimately in spirit, is in spirit in a fundamental relation to each of us, deeper than all other relations. It is a friendly world. It is a living world. It is our world. And so I would just like to complete, if I may, with some words from my most recent book that I hope speaks to this. And I would invite us to hear these with our hearts, the ears of our hearts, if we may. For some 13.8 billion years, the universe soul, the soul of the universe, its innate unity has been progressively embodied in increasing complexity and diverse expressions. With the parental care of our sun and our moon, and that of her solar siblings, our planetary home Gaia's inheritance was the abundance of elemental resources bequeathed by ancestral stars, and a place of birth so perfectly nurtured by water and light for the emergence of her living Gaiosphere. As a planetary mother, even when faced with mass extinctions, she not only endured but resolutely recovered and went on to continue to serve the universe souls and her own indomitable evolutionary impulse. At this completion of her story, at least for now, I wrote, I not only remain in wonder at the audacity of the visionary magnificence of a cosmos that could dream such a thought that is our universe and Gaia, but in seeking to understand how this living marvel is co-created, my awe has risen to such heights of reverence and love that finding words to describe them has become nigh impossible. As I've continued to seek a deeper sense of how our universe is as it is, a possible answer to the initial question I asked at the beginning of the story of Gaia, of why, has also emerged. It tells of a universe that learns through its holographic and holarchic manifestation, and through its explorative, experiential, and evolutionary reflections to further know itself. Its innate unity through the co-creative appearance and tensions of its dualities with their universal masculine and feminine attributes, then reconciles in the trinities of their child expressions. Their flourishing in the diversity and complexity of its ongoing journey will ultimately come full spiral from unity in diversity to remembered unity in belonging and an ultimate return to unity. I describe its stories beginning not as a big bang, it was minute, but as the first moment of an ongoing, beautifully, exquisitely, experientially, evolutionary big breath, whose big breath breathes through our little breaths in every moment. So, to complete, we are the youngest of Gaia's organic children. We embody her legacy and that of the universe soul's evolutionary arc, and we stand together with them at the bow wave of their and our next emergent possibility. We're the last of our kind, and yet we're not alone. We and her entire family are Gaians. Thank you, everyone.
If we may, I would like to take a minute. I'd like to take a minute for silence, if we may. Claudius, would you like to begin when you would like to?
Jude, thank you so much. That was beautiful, elucidating, and encouraging. Your image of the caterpillar being a consumer and the butterfly converting to the capacity to be a pollinator is stunning. It's stunning. And that constriction in the shell in which the caterpillar finds itself and has to fight its way out, to be liberated, to be able to fly as an analogy for our human evolution is stunning. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. What we're going to do now is we're going to open firstly to Q&A, question and answer and observations. And then from there, we'll go into chat rooms and just contemplate that very question that you raised at the beginning. And we'll come back to that. So first of all, anybody ready to engage with a question or an observation to Dr. Jude Currivan? Stick up your hand, please.
Jeff Bloomberg.
Jeff Bloomberg.
Thank you, Claudius. How many comments and questions may I have? May I take?
Rations one.
Well, firstly, Dr. Jude, thank you very much for that. It was phenomenal to listen to you, your interpretation of Smuts and your close reading of Smuts warms a Smuts scholar like myself very deeply. And I thank you for that. Listening to you in your quantum physical way gave scientific support to Smuts's idea of God. I get quite emotional having listened to you and to interpret what he was saying in scientific terms, in modern scientific terms. It's incredible. So thank you very much for that. There's a couple of questions, physics questions that I'd like to ask, if I may, Claudius.
Go.
It's really some help from you. You know, Smuts read the general theory of relativity in 1920, some years before he wrote Holism and Evolution, and it changed everything for him. He had written, he had read the special theory 10 years before, but the general theory changed things quite a bit for him, and his understanding of space-time and gravity changed his theory of matter, and he saw space-time as something structural, and therefore that was how he interpreted the holistic nature of space-time. He saw space-time as being structural and therefore holistic. I've never had the benefit of speaking to a professional physicist before, and I was wondering what your opinion would be of that interpretation of his, how he saw holism in the new physics. And that's why he changed his argument from attacking the mechanistic scientific world to accepting this now as a new holistic world. The new physics was more holistic for him. But he said, like I think you said in your talk, the scientists themselves hadn't realized the consequences of this deep change in the new physics. I would just like a comment from you on that. And then I'll add one more question and then you can think about it. You speak about the great thought. And my first thought came to mind was, do you think mind is primordial? And if so, Smuts had quite a bit to say about panpsychism, and he rejected panpsychism, and because it contradicted his theory of evolution. If mind was at the beginning, where was the opportunity for it to evolve? So let me leave you with those two. I have more, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those, Jeff. I really appreciate that. I mean, one of the things that I absolutely love is his willingness to follow where the evidence leads, and I think that's the mark of a good scientist, someone who's curious in any way, and he was, and his was the nature of reality, which is my own lifelong curiosity to understand that. And in my journey too, if I've had a theoretical framework where the evidence has gone beyond it, I'm happy to discard the theoretical framework and follow the evidence. And throughout the whole journey of science, that's really enabled us to include and transcend. And, you know, when he was writing, and Einstein took this view that essentially cosmic mind is foundational. And that was the view of Max Planck as well. It was also the view subsequently of David Bohm. It's my view. It's been the view of many pioneering scientists, as well as spiritual seekers throughout the ages and wisdom teachers and keepers throughout the ages. So for me, what this is showing, what the evidence is showing, is ever more compellingly so, that the perspective that the Vedas, the ancient, Indian Vedic tradition, taught us, that mind and consciousness aren't something we have, they're literally what we and the whole world are. What I would say, and just to go back one point on space-time, yes, we're now sort of seeing that the energy, matter and space-time are emergent phenomena of a manifested universe arising from deeper non-physical realms of causation, meaningfully so. So that's, I think, really important. Einstein, to begin with, himself didn't really dwell on the evolutionary aspect of the universe. And so what came forward was a perspective that somehow past, present, and future are all part of what's called a block universe. That is no longer the case that we would perceive this. What we now have is an evolutionary story that began 13.8 billion years ago, that has moved from simplicity to complexity and individuated self-awareness to this point. But we're now, as I mentioned at the end, we're now on the bow wave of the emergent potential future. And that's the universe's ongoing future journey that may continue in its life cycle for another, tens of billions of years. And we may or may not be part of that, depending on the choices we make pretty much now. So yes, what I'm sharing is very much in line with the holism that Jan put forward. What I would say though, and I'm absolutely in agreement with general relativity, I think we've got a better understanding of the nature of what time is about. And I write about that in the paper, and I write about that a lot. But time essentially at the Planck scale is literally, it maps the journey. It tells the story of the evolution of our universe from its first moment through its past to its present, and then opening into the emergent potential of the future. So in terms of panpsychism, what I'm sharing is a view that universal mind is innately there from the very beginning. And yet the story of our universe, rather as a great thought, is that thought differentiating itself into individuated expressions of self-awareness. And that's, the journey from the first atoms through stars, through galaxies, through interstellar clouds of molecular hydrogen, where before even planetary systems were born, have all the building blocks for further emergence in terms of building blocks of biological organisms. A year ago, just over, some material was collected from a 4.6 billion year old asteroid called Bennu. And I love that the probe that collected it was called Osiris. But anyway, that's a different story. But the material was brought back here and analysed. And it showed that material, 4.6 billion year old asteroid material, had all of the amino acids, building blocks of proteins, and all 5 nucleobases for DNA and RNA. Just think about that, because that was one of the oldest parts of our solar system that collapsed around 5.5 billion years ago from one of those molecular clouds. So it shows us, and we've seen the evidence spectroscopically actually in the clouds themselves, all the building blocks that would go on then to be able to evolve further emergence and complexity were already there, even before our sun and our solar system and many, 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 many other suns and solar systems came into being, were born. And we now know that there are more planets than stars in our galaxy. We're finding hundreds and every day more planets that are like Earth, and many others that are capable, potentially have water, which is key, but can have planetary homes for further emergence of individuated complexity and self-awareness. So it's a whole step beyond what the old notions of panpsychism were, but it's very much a perspective of an evolutionary universe of meaning and inherent purpose.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for bringing into my mind Smuts' statement, the universe is individuating even as the individual universalizes.
It's beautiful. Exactly. And, that's the cosmic hologram as well. That's the whole, a hologram. The wholeness is in every pixel, every part of it. And that holographic principle is the attribute that enables the wholeness of our universe to express itself, as you described, Claudius, in every part of its adventure and its evolutionary emergence.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
My sweet, it's now 11 o'clock, and the next presentation is at 11:30. So I'm wondering whether we have time to have breakout rooms, a thank you, and tea.
So what we're busy debating is how much time we have to engage, and do we go into breakout rooms? So let's see how far we get with the folks that want to still contribute and engage with you directly.
Yes, I think that's good.
Yeah. Who's next?
Marcus.
Michael.
Marcus.
Marcus.
Thank you so much, Jude. Really, really appreciated that. I've heard you speak several times before, and each time I discover new things. It's as though the holon builds as I hear you again and again, and that's just a great experience. And you do such a great job of bringing together so much complexity, but make it accessible rather than simple, and that's a great gift. Thank you. My small contribution here on this question of mind first or not was just that what popped up for me while I heard the conversation was the particular Buddhist school that talks about storehouse consciousness. And it's storehouse consciousness, we can understand that a little bit like, if you want, the place in which the archetypes, non-manifest archetypes exist. And that's what led me in my talk yesterday to equate the stories we tell and the ecosystem that we live in, and that when we tell a story of climate change, we get climate change. And so this is why I said we end up with we create the universe, if you want, that the stories we tell expresses. But the interesting thing of storehouse consciousness is that some people imagine it as a fixed thing. But what becomes really clear through your expression is that the storehouse is an evolutionary thing, that in a way the archetypes change themselves, they go on an evolutionary journey, and that we have this relationship between information on the 2D level and the manifest expressed universe on the 3D level that are constantly in a unity that's connected. So it's always the origin and the latest expression together, but the origin has also undergone an evolutionary process at the same time. So if you want, there's the protoplasma and the final expression always at the same time, and they influence each other. That came to life for me really beautifully in the way you brought that together, and connects to so many traditions and their intuitions about the nature of the universe. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. I agree. I mean, for me, I think you might know, some of you might know, I've been what I call walking between worlds since I was 4 years old. So my whole life experience has been one of engaging with many different levels of sentience, and most of them discarnate. And whether that's been, in the Apakuna, the spirits of the mountains, or archetypal intelligences in many, many other ways. And I agree, my experience is that the archetypes themselves, which is part of our collective psyche, in that part of reality, are also evolving. As well as a cosmologist, I'm also an astrologer. Because if we don't just take love seriously, we take unitive reality seriously, then everything in our universe is part of that overall living sentience. And so as an astrologer, what I've found over a number of years is a perspective that the archetypes are themselves evolving. Because of course we have that sort of continuing sort of relationship between our own psyche and the wider psyche. And, speaking with Rick Tarnas, who did Cosmos and Psyche as a seminal book many years ago, he speaks to this. And I think more and more astrologers, through their own inner journeys, are also appreciating this, as well as cosmologists coming from the other side of it. And I just wanted to clarify something, though, that I think Jeff mentioned. I'm not a professional scientist, physicist, and I'm delighted I'm not, because if I was, I would not be having this conversation.
That makes a lot of sense, because because my understanding of the current controversy between the hard problem of consciousness and the split in the science community, physics community, is very confusing to a lay person like myself. And I had at one time thought that Smuts had prefigured the hard problem of consciousness in his chapter 9, Mind as an Organ of Control, and then the essays that he wrote that have unpublished, which I will release to you, but it builds on his theory of mind. And in my opinion, and I'm a lay person, I believe he prefigures what David Chalmers is talking about today as the hard problem of consciousness. But that will be revealed in my book.
I look forward to that, because for me, the hard problem of consciousness is asking the wrong question, because the question is, how does immaterial mind arise from material brain? The hard problem. And I suggest that that's the wrong question to be asking.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
But I just want to take aside that other point that you're perhaps referring to, is for me, the universe is a living universe, and therefore sentience is all pervasive, whether we as human beings are here or not. Whether we, after 13 billion years, 8 billion years, the universe evolved to its expression, its self-aware, individuated expression in us, but many, many, many. I mean, if you speak to, I would say most, a lot more cosmologists now, if you'd have asked them 20 years ago, do you believe in extraterrestrial life? Most would say no. Very few would say that now. Very few would say that now. And yet, and as I said, DNA was right first time over 5 billion years ago, because it's so fit for purpose. And for me, that's such a wonderful expression of the innate intelligence of our evolutionary universe. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Claudius. Thank you, Jude. That I was entranced by that. It seeded so many lovely thoughts. But I have a question I would like to ask you, if I may. I was really enlightened on the first day, being able to listen very closely to Professor Querbus du Pisani. And thank you again for that talk, where he explained very, very simply that what Jan Smuts was wishing to do with his book was, at one level, to bring hope to people in an age of anxiety after the end of the Great War. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about how we, in our journeys, can bring hope to the people we know in a time of anxiety.
Thank you, Michael. I wrote a book called Hope. Healing Our People and Earth, quite a while ago now. And it was this very point, how, and for me, this does offer authentic hope, because what we can really say now, and evidence-based, is that unity isn't an aspiration. It is our existential reality, which is why I'm inviting us to take love seriously, why I'm inviting us to see this understanding as far more than a scientific revolution, because it affects everyone. Because it's about how we relate with each other, what choices we make, how do we see the world, and then what do we do about it? And I think that's why the Club of Rome asked me to write this paper, because back in 1972, they commissioned a report called Limits to Growth. And that was co-led or led by Donella Meadows. And what Donna spoke to was the theory of change, how change comes about. And she talked about a ladder of interventions. And, at the bottom of the ladder, you can change goals, you can change, key performance indicators and all of those things. But the most important way to change, to transform, is through a change of worldview, through a change of mindset. So for me, it's this change from seeing ourselves and the world as separate to seeing ourselves and the world as us as unique expressions in its wholeness. And that is very much what Jan was seeing as well. But now we have 100 years more of both conflicts because we haven't moved on from there, and to a point of unsustainability because we have not moved on from there, and at a time when the evidence is now so compelling at every scale and across numerous fields of research and can be brought into what I've done with the Club of Rome paper, because they, after Limits to Growth, their whole approach is whole systems, but they've realized that their whole systems aren't whole enough and they've got a hole in them. So I'm what I'm calling a Trojan mouse within the Club of Rome to bring this one. But the beauty of it is both co-presidents of the Club of Rome and the Secretary General at the highest levels invited this. They realize that this is able to take them to their whole next level of significant interventions through a change of worldview that Donna spoke to back in 1972.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Jude.
Thank you, Michael.
Wow. Professor Cobus Dupisani, I'm talking to you. What's your experience now, having opened the space for us on Wednesday night?
Yeah, I'm also amazed at the presentations. I was very much impressed by Jeff's research. What I think is that he, in my opinion, is probably the person that has done the most comprehensive research of Smuts's writings since Hancock and Van der Poel. I think no one else has really gone into the writings up to the same level. He said he had 20,000 images of documents, and so he has an extensive knowledge of Smuts's thinking as it was expressed in his writings. So, and then, well, he then quite built a good argument on how Smuts viewed, or his what he called new idea of God. So I think he took that aspect of Smuts's worldview a step further than anyone else has done so far. So in his case, I am really looking forward to the book that he's going to publish. Then Marcus, the next presenter, his presentation made me think about Smuts's position in the whole discourse on development as opposed to sustainability. I when I looked at or when I listened to Marcus, I was thinking that Smuts in a way was building a bridge between the that 19th century idea when he was at Cambridge, this idea of the great idea of progress on the one hand in this 19th century, and then in the 20th century, much later, the whole discourse about sustainable development. Um, um, and I was wondering, the people who came after him a few decades later, starting maybe with Rachel Carson, and then also Lovelock, our speaker today, mentioned about the Gaia thesis, and the deep ecologists I was wondering, were those people aware of Smuts's holism? Did they read Holism and Evolution? Um, yes, so that image that Marcus showed of the tree, with the roots and all the different species, was a beautiful image of this whole idea of interconnectedness to which Jude also referred today. Yeah, in today's speech, I'll have to sit down. I've made notes. I'll have to go through my notes again and then think about it because it's so fabulous. I spoke on a different level about hope in the 1920s, but I think your presentation today took it much further. It deepens much. It's a much more deeper uh, sense of the hopefulness of this our evolutionary universe. So I think it opens wonderful perspectives for us. So I must really say that these talks are very enlightening, and I think I'm just looking forward to your publication, Claudius, of all these papers. It should be mind-boggling, I think. And thank you for everything you've done to organize this event.
What a pleasure. What a pleasure. Thank you so much. Is there anybody else that wants to make an observation?
We need to break for tea before we start with David.
And welcome, David. So then, Michael, it's over to you to thank our speaker, and then we'll take a 10-minute break.
Thank you, Claudius. I think, Jude, I have given you a sort of flavor of what I think about what you brought. It was enchanting. I began with curiosity, and I now, if I speak personally, I am completely energized and focused. You have helped me understand the opportunities not to think of the sea of troubles, but to think of beauty and how further we can explore those deep patterns. So there was a great deal of value in that. There were a couple of things I wrote down which I would like to read just as an example. If we see the world through the eyes of wholeness instead of separation, what does that mean for how we live? And I loved, and this is the last point, I absolutely loved the clarity of the invitation to butterflies from metacrisis to metamorphosis. I thought that was wonderful. To be to be continued, I think. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And a last word from you, Jude.
Just to thank everyone. And I think when we come together like this is just part of our remembering. Because when we come together in this way, we do know that we're inseparable. We do embrace the joy, the beauty, the truth, the goodness, the love that is our fundamental nature. And so for me, it's an invitation to continue for us to do this. I talk about linking up and lifting up. So to just complete with gratitude and love and joy and an invitation to continue to link up and lift up. These are amazing times, challenging times, and yet together we can do this. We can do this.
Thank you so much. And that's not the last word from Jude. After David Lorimer's presentation, we're going to have a conversation with the presenters. So a tea break now, and then we'll reconvene in 10 minutes time at 1:30.